This is the British Museum, home to one of the finest collections of prints and drawings anywhere in the world, and open free to everybody for more than 250 years. And here, there are more than 90 drawings by Michelangelo. The drawings can now be viewed by any serious student. But in Michelangelo's time, they were kept away from nearly everyone. You're about to see one of the most famous and most inspiring images in the whole of Western art, or at least some of the steps that went into the making of it. And I think it's fair to say that the artist, Michelangelo, would be horrified if he knew that you were looking at them. This is a 500-year-old bit of work in progress, the sketch for the body of Adam that was to lead ultimately to the great act of creation in the centre of the vault of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. This programme is about Michelangelo the draftsman. His surviving drawings range from rough preparatory sketches to fully accomplished works of art. But in all of them, we find Michelangelo the creator.
The drawings for me are, in a way, trying to say, where does the core of a human being exist?
Michelangelo is somebody that is straight into the middle of the form, and the contours find their way out from the mass of the figure.
I feel embarrassed because they're so sexy.
It's a real eye-opener. These drawings are an essential ingredient in the preparation of knowledge.
All his life, Michelangelo drew, but only a small proportion of the drawings survive, and many of them were destroyed by him. And it's because they show his hesitations, his second thoughts, that the master himself, the perfectionist, would have been reluctant to let us see them. The drawings bring us closer to the master. Michelangelo Buonarroti was born in Florence in 1475, into a family that had rather come down in the world, but that still had considerable social pretensions. And he was brought up here, in the parish of Santa Croce, the church where he and his ancestors are buried. Michelangelo's father initially took a very dim view of his son's desire to become an artist and earn his living with his hands. But eventually, the 12-year-old Michelangelo was apprenticed to the artist Domenico Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio and his brother ran one of the most successful workshops in Florence, producing altarpieces and large-scale fresco decorations for the church and for wealthy patrons like the Medici. In time-honoured Florentine tradition, much of Michelangelo's apprentice activities would have centred on drawing.
These people, especially in the Renaissance, were so accomplished. I think you would learn a fantastic amount. The space it is on the page, how to express weight and the movement of the body, I think it's really important. Like trying to get this heavier mark to sort of suggest where this hand is in relation to his bum and the way they're weighing down in comparison to something that's not touching, like further down in his leg, like his leg. It's not touching. There's not a pressure on it. Michelangelo is fantastic.
This one might be a tough one for the model because to hold that position is tough for the muscle, but it's a beautifully, it's the roundness which is beautiful, and the two arcs of the triangle, the rectangle right there.
Perhaps the best way to get a proper idea of just how much Michelangelo owed Domenico Ghirlandaio is to look at the drawings. If you look at this one, this is Domenico Ghirlandaio's sketch for the fresco of the Birth of the Virgin. As you can see, he's very quickly roughed out the shape, the space in which the figures are going to be, and then he's got this form of simplification that suggests the figures. Michelangelo would have seen this when he was 12, 13 in Ghirlandaio's workshop. 30, 40 years later, he uses exactly the same kind of drawing for the three crosses, the rough sketching of the space and that geometric simplification of the figures. And this is, I think, exactly the kind of comparison that Michelangelo would not have wanted us to have. He denied his debt to Ghirlandaio. The comparison of the drawings makes it quite clear. And we can see it again in another pair. This, the Ghirlandaio drawing, the sketch for the figure of a young Florentine girl, probably actually a Florentine boy apprentice dressed as a girl, modelling for the fresco. And you can see that Domenico gets the sense of the figure by this mixture of strong vertical lines, hatching, and then dense cross-hatching. It's exactly the same method that's used by Michelangelo a few years later. But Michelangelo, you can see, moves a great deal further. His use of the cross-hatching is much denser, much more specific, giving you a wonderful sense of huge volume, mass in the drapery, in the clothes.
I've had 3 goes at trying to emulate what he did, and it is so difficult. I haven't been trained since I was a child, and so, I haven't done daily hatching, and it is really hard to get such a delicate mark and such regular strokes, even though they're sort of moving over this form. You sense this form underneath the draped figure, and I found it impossible to do. I mean, it was fascinating to do, and I'd love to do more. But to get that kind of solidity with such simple tools for a start, I mean, probably a bird's feather, a quill pen like this is very difficult.
But this drawing also shows us another thing about Michelangelo that he probably wouldn't have wanted us to see. Because if Hugo turns it over, you can see that he's kept this bit of paper, taken it with him from Florence to Rome, or probably had it sent from Florence to Rome, and on the back has drawn a head that's related to the work on the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo uses the drawings as a stock of ideas that he can return to, his intellectual capital that he carries with him. And it's also a demonstration of a certain meanness. Michelangelo keeps the paper, he reuses it, and he carries it with him. These 4 drawings tell us an enormous amount about the way he worked, about the way he thought. Michelangelo learnt to paint and to draw from Ghirlandaio, but he taught himself to sculpt. And it was as a sculptor of marble that he was invited to Rome, where in the late 1490s he made the great Pietà, now here in St. Peter's. This was a signature work, literally so because it's his only signed sculpture. It was a triumph for such a young man, and looking at the idealized body of Christ, we can see how much he had learned from classical art. Around the time that Michelangelo was carving the Pietà, one of the most famous classical sculptures of all time was discovered and brought to Rome. It caused a sensation. A Roman copy of a Greek bronze statue, it is called the Apollo Belvedere. It became a byword for graceful idealization of the naked male figure, and it must have astonished Michelangelo. And we know that Michelangelo spent quite a lot of time looking at these sculptures in the... The Apollo Belvedere was one of a number of classical sculptures collected and brought to the Vatican by Julius II.
Julius brought many statues to the Vatican, and in this courtyard he built a sort of a theatre where these statues took up a role. They played Cleopatra, they played basically Virgil's in it,